Well, there you go. And for those of our viewers around the world, that was a really seminal moment in kind of protest, certainly here in the UK. Well, with me is Polly Russell, who's the curator at the British Library, who's involved in the launch of the Oral Archive, and Sally Alexander, who's Professor of History at Goldsmiths University and herself a women's lib campaigner in the 60s and 70s. Welcome, both of you. Polly, if I could start with you. I mean, that was fascinating to listen to Rachel Johnson there. But what are you trying to achieve with the archive?
We're trying to achieve a lasting record of the stories of a generation of women whose fights and struggles in the UK for freedom and equality have changed the way that women live in this country, and men as well. So we want to archive those as a permanent record, so that future generations and people now can access them and learn about that history and those women's stories with first-hand accounts.
I mean, Sally, are we in danger? I mean, we're in the 21st century now. Are we in danger that young women today may not actually know about that kind of history and maybe take a lot of the freedom they have for granted?
I think young women do take a lot of the freedoms for granted, particularly living in so-called liberal England or Britain, in a liberal economy. But they're very young and they'll learn, and as they go to university or go on to study or become mothers themselves, they'll want to know more about the relationships between women and men, bringing up children, the struggle for the vote, the kinds of human rights issues that will confront them as they grow up through their daily lives. And the archive at the British Library and the Women's Library of 60 lives, women talking about their life histories and their work for women's rights, for women's freedoms, for equal pay, sexuality and so on, will inspire them. It's an international movement.
And I suppose all this begs a question about what is feminism, because I mean, we seem to go through a phase in the 90s where, for example, I'm not trying to be critical here, but some women or some young women kind of aped what men did, you know, so the ladette culture. So just because men went around necking a load of booze and throwing up, you know, there was that culture. And is that feminism?
I don't think that's feminism, but then there have always been tomboys and there have always been girls wanting to be boys and behaving like boys. But feminism, no, it's about women's rights. It's about relationships with men and with children. It's about future generations. It's about a more equal society. It's about social justice. And it touches the most intimate parts of everyone's lives. Yours, you know, every woman, every man throughout the world. So there'll always be a need for feminism.
And Polly, as a curator, you must have gone through, I presume, hundreds and hundreds of choices about what to include. What's your overriding impression of all these films that you've seen, the women you've heard?
Well, there are not, I mean, first of all, how incredibly moving the stories are. Secondly, I think what you just talked about, that so much of what we take for granted now as being completely normal, you know, the ability to get a mortgage as a woman, the ability to go and hire a fridge on hire purchase, you don't have to get your husband to sign for that.
So now I'd forgotten that. Did we? When we have to do that?
Well, we have great examples of people talking about a woman called Una Kroll, who was a surgeon with 4 children, was unable to get a fridge on hire purchase without the signature of her husband.
When was that?
This was in 1969.
Right. Gosh.
Yeah. So So those are examples. The other thing that has really been wonderful and remarkable about this archive is how much fun these women had. You know, these were serious issues, but these women enjoyed campaigning and protesting. They used originality, they brought creativity, imagination to the ways that they tried to change the world. And that's really engaging and interesting to listen to. And I think that's why people will be drawn to the archive.
And Sally, there is an international dimension to this. I mean, all our viewers are from around the world. And I just wonder if what feminism means to women here in Britain may be completely different to what it means for women in, I don't know, Indonesia. We've just done a story on Lady Gaga and her clothing during a concert. It offended some people.
Yes, yes. It is an international movement, and different cultures do shape the kinds of relationships that women have with men and with themselves and so on, and with their bodies. But also there are religious and cultural differences, but that's always true. I mean, you wouldn't recognize the world I was brought up in the 1940s and 50s. And these differences are, you know, what shape the demands and the way you put the demands and the way you campaign.
Polly, Sally talked about feminism being about relationships with men, and I just wonder if now, where does feminism go next? Whether it needs to, you know, work on, you know, men, because in a way women have got this new equality and so on, but they seem to have to do it all and maybe it's time, you know, that there needs a men's liberation movement to sort of move men along and to kind of get with it.
Well, actually, our archive and the website that we're building does have interviews with men who were involved in the men's liberation movement during the same period of time. And in fact, you know, much of what happened in terms of campaigning during the 60s, 70s, 80s happened because men were part of helping out in creches and supporting their women feminist activist partners, sisters, daughters, friends. So men were always part of the story, and I think they will continue to be so. And we're interested in this being a living archive, which we add to. So thinking about collecting recordings with men is always part of what we're thinking about.
And Sally, there's a question about what liberation is. I think I read Germaine Greer saying once, or reading about her saying that, you know, women wanted liberation. In some ways, they've settled for equality. They've, you know, become like men. Just very, very briefly.
I don't think men need liberation, actually. I mean, liberation is the word from the 60s. Now the struggles are for human rights and for equality and for social justice in the same areas, sexuality, pay, and so on. But I don't think men need liberation.
All right. Sally Alexander, Polly Russell, thank you both, and good luck with tomorrow and with the archive. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, before